Okay, hit me with your fun question.
Okay, well, it's not really a fun question. It's kind of a fun question. So
I'll make it fun.
Okay, we're talking about like fairness and is God fair is kind of the question. And what sparked this question is the story of the flood. That's kind of a question that a lot of people have in response to it, is like, well, was that fair of God to do that? So anyway, so I wanted us to think about something unfair from your childhood. Or maybe you're a parent. So what's like something that from William's point of view is like completely unfair that you ask of him?
Well, this isn't complete. This is him. He uses the word unfair, and I've been trying to help explain. And it's actually it is a really hard word to explain, because most of the time I'd be like, that's not fair. I'm like, that's not what fair means. He's like, what does it mean? I'm like, I don't want to say the same. And so I've been like trying to explain to him. So the best example that happens all the time is he'll be doing quiet time, and he'll be playing with all these toys, and he'll get them all out, and he'll be like, okay, clean up. And he'll be like, help me. Like, nope, you got them out. You can clean them up. And I'm like, that's not fair. Like, what? That's not fair for me to help you clean them up. What are you talking about? That's not fair. But like in his mind, it doesn't seem right that he would have to pick up all of that stuff. Like, it just seems overwhelming to him. So he'll say like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
So there's many examples. He uses that phrase way too often. But yeah, what about you?
Okay, so growing up, my parents were like, they weren't super strict about what I could and couldn't watch like on TV, but they were kind of strict. Like, they like regulated. Like, I was one of those kids, like I couldn't watch SpongeBob for a while.
That's for the best. SpongeBob's terrible.
Oh, I like SpongeBob.
I think SpongeBob's horrible.
And there were like a lot of shows on like Disney Channel and stuff that I couldn't watch. Except for when I went to my cousin's house, then I could watch Hannah Montana when I was at Martha's house. Which was
Rebel Gabby watching Hannah Montana.
Yes, very rebellious of me. But one of the things that I couldn't watch was, do you know the show Wizards of Waverly Place?
I know of it, but I'm too old.
It was like where Selena Gomez like got her start. She was in Wizards of Waverly Place. Anyway, also a Disney Channel show. And my parents told me that I couldn't watch Wizards of Waverly Place. And when I would ask why, they told me they were like, it's witchcraft. Witchcraft. You can't watch Wizards of Waverly Place. But then I remember like later on, we would watch Harry Potter. Yeah. And like as a family, we would have like family movie night and we'd watch Harry Potter. And I remember sitting there and I would be like, wait, if I can't watch Wizards of Waverly Place because of witchcraft. But like, how?
So it was like the inconsistency of it.
How is this different? And I remember, but I didn't want to say anything to my parents because I like.
You didn't want to lose Harry Potter.
Yes. Yeah. Like in my mind, I was like, if I tell them, they'll be like, oh yeah, wow, this is witchcraft. Yep, you need to leave the room. You can't watch this anymore. But like when I got older, I remember, and I like was old enough to the point where my parents didn't care if I watched Wizards of Waverly Place or not.
What age is this?
I don't know. This was in like high school.
Oh,
like
okay.
So like long. And I remember being like, you would tell me that I couldn't watch this because of this reason, but then I could watch something else that seemed like the same reason. And my mom was like, oh, I would just tell you that you couldn't watch shows that I thought were annoying and would like give
that
like,
fits with
like
SpongeBob.
a moral superior like reasoning
wow.
behind it. But she was like, yeah, I just thought Wizards of Waverly Place was annoying. There were a bunch of shows.
Have you been
that.
like deconstructing all of your parents' guidance to you since that moment?
No, because like
how many of my friends, how many of my activities was it just annoying and there was no moral reason?
Yeah, no. But looking back on it, like I do realize, like a lot of the show, like iCarly was another big one that they were like, they're disrespectful. Which, in fairness, the kids like were pretty disrespectful to like adults in their life. But also now when I watch like shows like that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like 80% of this is just people like screaming. Like, so I can imagine like if I was a parent, I'd be like, oh my gosh, turn that off. That's so annoying.
And that's why SpongeBob bothers me. Is every time I like hear a clip of it or something, I'm like, it just sounds so annoying. It's not a moral reason for disliking SpongeBob.
There's so much like meme, like culture is surrounded by SpongeBob.
There is,
like,
and I'm fine. I feel like the meme culture is usually contextual enough that you still get it.
Yeah.
Like it's the like, yeah, I can already see many memes in my head and I'm like, I get what they're saying.
Yeah. But just like the Bible, it's better if you understand the layer.
I'm okay with missing out on that layer of
oh my gosh.
SpongeBob.
No one clipped that of me comparing SpongeBob memes.
Defending
it's just
Gabby
like
defends.
the Bible.
That's our title. Like Gabby defends SpongeBob, compares it to Bible.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
We already have an inflammatory title.
Yes.
And we haven't even started talking about anything.
So AI, that generates our titles. Use that as the title if you know how to understand me. I don't know
Wow.
if it does.
Yeah, that's true.
Future robot.
We use AI to generate a description of what we talk about. So
Yeah.
that's interesting. Shout out to
AI.
the AI, I guess.
Okay, we're jumping in. We do actually have a lot to talk about today.
Yes. Yeah.
So do you want to introduce it or do you want me to?
I mean, I think I already did, but
oh, yeah, good point.
I think that's, I actually want to circle back to what you were talking about of like how difficult it is to explain fairness to William. And like, it is it's almost like we all have a really strong sense of what's fair in us. Like, I think we would all be able to react pretty, just like William. Can have a really strong reaction to something when it feels unfair or not right. But how do I don't know. How do you think we even get the concept of fairness?
I don't know. I think of C.S. Lewis a lot, actually, because he uses that as a way to argue that we all have some sense of right and wrong because everybody has this innate like fairness meter in their brain or heart or something. I don't know. William seems to just leverage it for his own advantage. That's what I witness. Like at some point he picked up the word or the phrase and he uses it purely for his own like well-being.
Yeah.
Something's unfair to him is the only time he leverages it. He never is like, well, you handed me 4 pieces of candy and there's only 5 left, so that's not fair. I'll give you, one and have never happens. So
yeah, which that's obvious to see in a 4-year-old, but as adults we do that in much less obvious ways too.
Yeah, like we feel it when it's unfair to us, but we don't feel it when it's not unfair to us, when it's in our advantage. Yeah, so it is a really hard concept because it's not the same. It doesn't, I don't remember. I'm just trying to remember a parent that said something about fair. How fair is not the same. It's not equal.
I think it was from our affinity group.
Yeah, but what phrase did they use? Do you remember?
I think it was Matt.
I remember the negative thing of like, it's not that it means the same.
Yeah, he said.
Or is that all he said was fair doesn't mean the same?
I think so. That's what I remember really strongly is that he was like, fair doesn't mean everyone gets the same. Like, that's not what fair means. Fair.
Which is interesting because then he's like leveraging an unspoken definition of fair by saying what it isn't. So in order to be treated fairly, that doesn't mean you're treated the same. Here's a tangible example from married life is we've talked before about how men and women need different like amounts of sleep.
Yeah, true.
And so like when we have a kid and I'm trying to figure out how am I fair to Melissa about like how much sleep we each get, napping, the rest, all of that kind of stuff. 1, she gave birth to a child, so her body like physically needs more than I do. And 2, if females actually need more sleep than males, fair wouldn't be us getting the same amount of sleep. That would actually be unfair because I would feel way more rested than she would. Yeah. So I feel like it's almost a like outcome based, like in my mind, like how I usually process it. I don't know if I would say like that's the right way, but I think how I try to process it is the end result of what we get. But that like all of a sudden becomes political in some ways of like, well, if the end result is what's fair, what about, what if Melissa didn't use her time to sleep and she did something else but now she's tired? Like, well, she's not rested, but that's not because I wasn't being fair. I don't know. Like it does get really complicated. The hope I think is that people are equally cared for and advantaged and well-being. Like I think that's the hope of fairness. But how you get there, it's super complicated. That's the best I have.
No, I think that's really good. I think that's helpful. And I think just going off of like what shapes fair and unfair for us is our like it's our own personal experience. You know what I mean? Like that's really, it's not the only thing that shapes us, like our view of fair and unfair, but it's by far the strongest thing that shapes it. So yeah, I think that sleep thing is a really interesting example because that's an example of you recognizing something being fair or unfair after learning something that's like outside maybe of what your own like personal experience is. Because before learning that, you would have just said
50-50.
Yeah. I get 8 hours of sleep. Melissa gets 8 hours of sleep.
But what's weird is like fair. In the past, fair was like the guy works and the woman takes care of the kids. And so it almost was more like role responsibility, less. And I think that's what's so hard about fair is oftentimes there's a term for it in game design, incomparables. So it's the idea that like two things, like if you want $2 or $3, it's like, well, clearly 3 is better. But if it's like, do you want $2 or a cheeseburger? Like, I don't know, it's only $1 cheeseburger, but I guess maybe $5, but I'm hungry now.
Right.
So it's like they're not
yeah.
identical things. And so I feel like a lot of times with fairness, there's so many incomparables that you're like, it's so subjective. I don't know how to rate the fairness of this necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's what that gets to at the sleep is there's intangibles there that you can't rate.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do we understand God's character in that too?
I think first acknowledging the like complicatedness of it. Like God's obviously far beyond us, but even just when you jump into the conversation to go, okay, it's not as simple as, does everybody get the same thing or equal or whatever? Which then takes me to maybe this is jumping ahead, but to the passages repeated pretty often about God sending gifts to the just and the unjust. Like he sends rain on the just and the unjust. Like God does things for people even when they don't deserve it. And there's almost a like equality to it that's a little bit surprising, probably to an ancient person. But
yeah. And even as we're like processing out loud, I'm almost realizing like how much of fairness is maybe something that we like project onto God. And that's not even necessarily I mean, kind of the concept of fairness is definitely in the Bible, but I don't know that the Bible really uses that language super often.
Well, even like if you think of fairness, is fairness equality based off of what you deserve, or is it just equality? Because I think with the like rain being sent on the just and the unjust, it brings up that question of, okay, if God gives everybody the same kind of gifts, is that actually fair? Because if some people are being good and some people are being bad, maybe that's not fair.
Right.
I mean, to like go to the William example,
Yeah.
if he doesn't eat his supper, but Lincoln does, and so I give Lincoln a dessert and I don't give William a dessert, is that fair or unfair? It's not equal, and they're not getting the same, but William didn't do what he's supposed to do to get the good thing. So like it gets like even more complicated when you add in morality, instead of just a blanket, like you deserve these things. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think entering into the conversation is just the acknowledgement that I don't even think we can pin down what fair is. So going into it knowing, okay, it's really complicated.
Yeah. Especially when like God's character is to be undeservedly generous and like undeservedly extending of grace and mercy.
Go to the parable of the workers in the field. I think we've talked about that on the podcast before.
Yep.
Like it wasn't fair that he paid everybody the same when they didn't all work the same. You can go look it up. It's the parable of the workers in the field. I'll just explain.
I'll look it up.
This guy goes out and he tells somebody at 7 a.m., hey, come work for me for $100. And then at 8 a.m. he tells somebody, come work for me for $100. 9 a.m., come work for me for $100, all throughout the day. Somebody, he says at 3 p.m., come work for me for $100. And then at 4 p.m., end of the day, he pays everybody $100. And the guy working from 7 a.m. is like, whoa, why is the guy working at 3 p.m. getting the same work as me? Which maybe you've been in that situation where you're like, that's not fair. And he says like, I guess it says for the worker, but like, didn't I do what I said I was going to do to you? How is that unfair? Like you agreed to this in the beginning. So
yeah, well, in the NIV, it actually uses the language of unfair. This is in Matthew 20.
Interesting.
This
is on neither of our plan.
Yeah, wow. As the Spirit leads. Matthew 20, verse 13. And this is after in response to the guy who's been working all day that complains. But he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first and the first will be last.
Which is interesting. So if you don't know this, is that NIV?
Yeah.
So NIV usually tries to, it's called a dynamic equivalency where they, or not dynamic because it goes back and forth. Sometimes it'll do word for word. Sometimes it'll get an idea across. In the Greek, apparently it's just, I did you no wrong. So they translate it as like, I'm not being unfair, which you could connect in your mind. But as we're talking about fair, like it's so complicated that the line is like, I didn't do wrong to you or by you. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, but that's interesting that, our concept of fairness, and that's what this illustrates, is less about what God says and what he does. And it's more about when we look out
Yep.
to other people and say, well, was that fair for that?
Yeah.
Like
fair only works comparatively.
Yeah.
Like fair, at least how we use it. Like you could just, if you were isolated, go, oh, I did this thing and then I got in trouble. That doesn't seem right. But you would use maybe like right and wrong, not fair. Fair is like a very comparative, I think.
Yeah.
I think the areas where I would always get annoyed when I was a teenager or like elementary school, maybe you got annoyed by this or maybe not because you were better than I was. I would get annoyed when I would do something and not get a warning or I didn't remember that I got a warning. And then another kid would get a warning and I'd be like, don't give him a warning. Like you punished me, punish that kid. That's what I remember it.
That's funny. When I was a kid, a thing that my parents would do often was they would like, give me 3 chances or like give me 3 they'd tell me 3 times like don't do that. Do
they tell you like strike 1, strike 2 every time?
Not necessarily, but I don't even remember if it was like a stated thing of like we'll always give you 3 chances or if it was just kind of
generally
what they did, and so that's just what I came to expect. So I don't remember what I was doing, but I was in the back of the car and I had my Tamagotchi. Do you remember Tamagotchis?
Like, monster creature thing? Or like
yes, you like feed it and like take care of it. But it was like this little tiny...
Like keychains.
Yes, yeah. So I had my Tamagotchi and I was, I guess, obviously doing something I wasn't supposed to. I don't remember what. My mom told me to stop doing it and I didn't listen. And then she turned around and like took the Tamagotchi out of my hand and I was like, shocked. And I said to her, I was like, you didn't give me 3 chances. And my mom was like, you didn't listen to what I asked you to do.
But you were so expecting 3 times.
Yeah. So in that moment, that was unfair to me because I had expected that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she told me to stop, but I really don't actually have to stop until she tells me 2 more times. But
yeah, you were expecting grace.
Yeah.
Let you just get away with it. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Clearly, I think we've established we all have an idea of right or wrong. You've probably thought of many examples in your own life, but it is complicated to pin down exactly what that is. So.
Yes. Yeah. So I wanted to think about fairness, specifically in relationship to the flood, because that's what you taught on in part.
Yeah. Last week.
This past Wednesday, and even this upcoming Wednesday, or
in a couple weeks.
We're going to teach again on kind of like the continued downward spiral of humanity, and we'll revisit the flood a little bit too in that. So I'm going to read kind of chunks of the flood narrative. The flood narrative is like 3 whole chapters, so I'm not going to read all of that, but you can follow along. I'm in Genesis 6, verse 5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race that I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. I'm going to jump to 7, verses 1 through 5. The Lord then said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all the Lord had commanded him. And then jumping down to verses 22 through 24. So when the flood comes, it says, everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flooded the earth for 150 days. So something that I think about with this story in particular, and it's like a phrase that's in kind of Christianity culturally. It's not necessarily, I mean, it is an idea that's found in the Bible, but it's not necessarily phrased in the Bible this way. But something I hear a lot is God is a God of second chances. But then when you read a story like this, it seems like, oh, well, the whole of humanity didn't really
get a second
chance. Like that's what it feels like when you read this.
But now I'm connecting it to your story of the Tamagotchi and being like, maybe that was your point.
Yeah.
But yeah. Like, how many chances did these people actually have?
Right.
Yeah. Especially when you look at their lifespan of being hundreds of years. Like, they had a lot of time to not be doing what they were doing.
Yeah, totally. But I think the reaction that this story does create is like, well, that's great and all, but I don't know. I guess in the day and age that we live in now in Christianity, we hear all the time about like how grace is for like even the most vile offender. Like even like anyone can be redeemed. Anyone can have that second, third, fourth, fifth chance, so to speak. Like God's grace is for anyone who would respond. So like and maybe we can connect in with what you said, but like do we know that did everyone use up all of their chances? Like is that what this story is telling us? Like can we? I don't know. I'm like partially processing this out as I'm talking, but I think these are like the kinds of questions that this story brings up.
Yeah, I think so. Cards on the table for us too. I have less problems with this story than you do.
Yes, yeah.
I remember one of the things that shifted just how I think about these is somebody had mentioned how the place in the world that you come from really changes your perspective on these stories. And they said if you come from a relatively safe place, they're really problematic. And people from in other parts of the world where they see evil far more than we do.
Totally.
Instead, they look at Westerners, because it's usually non-Western countries, and they say like, you want a God that doesn't punish evil? Like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
So like, if you imagine if you're in a country where there's constant war and pain and people, are literally taking children away to be slave warriors, like they're stealing women, like all of these terrible things are happening. And then you come and tell them, yeah, God's actually not going to do anything about that. That's the kind of God he is. They'll look at you and be like, that sounds like a awful human or like an awful being.
Yeah.
That they would look at that kind of evil and do nothing. In the same way that like on a very, very minor level, Justin, as a fifth grader, watching someone else not get in trouble bothers me.
Right.
Like why would, and like sometimes it's a selfish bothering. But when someone's hurting you, you do feel that. Like that's part of the fairness, but it's part of just, you want someone to do something. When something feels unjust, which is related to, but maybe different than unfair, you want something to be done. So I feel like I have less problems. Maybe it's the being older. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. And And
I've seen a lot of bad crap in this world. And so sometimes I'm like, I'm trusting that these were really horrible people.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify that it's not that I like have a problem with this story, but I think it sits heavier with me maybe than it does with you.
Or even just the complications of like, how could God be good and yet do this? Given that, like, you just read it, everybody except for Noah and his 3 kids and their wives die.
Yeah.
There's 8 people left on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yes. And I think, I think that's a really fair and right thing to point out, because when I like, there are very few people that I can think of that I'm like,
evil.
Yeah. Like there are really few people that I can think about in my life that I've experienced or encountered personally, and even through like just like media or news that I'm like.
You even grew up though. It's weird how different things are. Of like even every villain now is humanized.
Yeah, that's true.
Like we're just raised in a culture of like, well, they're killing people because their parents were, or like they had this horrible backstory or something like that.
Yeah,
so like
that's true.
Any villain. I think of Thanos isn't wrong. Like I know that was old and it's meme like cringy now. But just how, and I know like half of it was just to mess with people. But just this idea of like building a villain that you empathize with is
that's
just
like compelling. Yeah.
It's new and it is very like, would just make no sense to somebody who's actually experienced that kind of horror.
Yeah.
That is portrayed often in media.
Yeah. But I think where it does become like complicated is thinking about like what like the evil that's within me too. You know what I mean? Like, is that I think sometimes in like villain portrayal in media, where those characters do become like compelling is sometimes they have like thoughts or ideals that it's like, oh, like I recognize that in myself. Like I recognize that instinct maybe, and obviously it's like a different thing to act on those instincts.
Yeah.
But I think that's where it does become like, I mean, it really is like almost the question of like God showing grace and mercy to me when like I can recognize the evil within myself, and then it makes it like, and we're gonna go there and like address that the people that we're talking about in this story aren't
good
like
people.
Yeah. It's not like correct to compare.
They cheated on their taxes, or they like, I don't know. That's an adult thing.
Like,
but,
it's not fair to compare. Like
they were swearing at school and they were watching a show they should. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they were
drinking.
Yeah.
Like when they were there was no age.
Or
but anyway.
Yeah. Were mean spirited and counting the ums and.
Yeah. You'll
the
never
girl
let that
who,
go.
Yeah. Well, I feel bad about it. I feel really bad about it. But
yeah. One day you'll move beyond that and feel forgiven.
I wish I could tell her. Now I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Want to make a I think I
should message her.
Which is interesting. Even like that's so insane in some ways for you to sit there and go, how could God punish like evil, and at the same time be like, how do I make amends?
Yeah, that's
for
true.
counting ums.
Yeah.
Like you within yourself, you have like such a strong sense of right and wrong, and yet at the same time, you put that right and wrong on God to go I think what's weird is I don't think many generations in history, not your generation, I mean like since the 1900s, or I don't know when this started, probably more later than that, but just the idea of even looking at the Noah story and saying, why would God kill those people, rather than why would God save someone? Like I think that's for most of human history what the reaction would be reading that story is like he didn't have to save anyone. He looked out and humanity was just terrible.
Yeah.
So why did he bother saving humans? And it's even through the Old Testament. I feel like that's the cry of the psalmist through different stories and things of like, why do you even care about us when we're really horrible to each other all the time?
Yeah. But I think the Bible also answers that question. And it like It goes on to answer it more explicitly like post the flood. So that's like one of the interesting things about the biblical narrative. But the Bible gives a really clear answer of that question. And in Western culture today, in a lot of ways, our culture has been so formed and shaped by like Christianity and Christian values that
we judge God based off of those values that we only got because of what he did.
Yeah. But the value and the idea of like every human being made in the image of God. And so therefore like every human having value and worth is a concept that comes from the Bible. So then to like read a story like this and be like, well, did those humans have value and worth? God says that they did. And in our like world and culture today, how we understand that to mean is like, okay, so therefore every person like deserves to live. Like they have a right to life. They have a right to like, like all of our conversations about like human rights are really formed based off that biblical idea of like.
And it having been played out for 2,000 years now.
Yes.
Because I think like the pithy answer sometimes to people are like, oh, why would God do that to them? Like, do you want them as your neighbors? Or would you want to live in that city?
Right.
Where people are like, all they do is evil to each other all the time.
Yeah.
No, you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And what's God supposed to do? Like set up rehabilitation centers throughout and who runs them? Noah. That's it. You start going through the like, so what's God supposed to do? And it really quickly becomes like, oh yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. There's no law. There's no like rule.
Yes.
So I think I feel more the injustice of what's happening.
Yeah. And that's so helpful because I think because all of those things are like so baked into me and like like the idea of, I mean, even the rest of the story, like with the law and the idea of there being like a really clear standard that God has communicated about how to live. And also because of that, he's like pretty clearly communicated consequences for like following that or not following that. And then again, just in like a post Jesus world where the idea of like redemption and every person having the chance for redemption is like
Yep.
is so baked into like me both personally and I think like
Culturally
and Christianity as a whole. And I also think that's like one of the most beautiful and compelling pieces about Christianity, like personally, is like this idea that like everyone can find like redemption and healing and reconciliation like through Jesus.
But that's even the point, like at this point in the story, part of what it should make you use like,
yes,
there's no hope for humans. They like humans are hopeless because what could save them? This might, I'm bleeding because I keep picking at my finger. This might be a weird connection. So Steve, you can edit it if this is bad. It gets into part of what you talked about a ton of, which is like what part of us leads towards evil, sometimes called like a sin nature or something.
Yeah.
But the connection sometimes, like I was just thinking just now was, because there's no law, there's no like, this is how you should be, there's no rule of land. Humans are just like set free to be what they're going to be, which kind of brings up judges kind of goes back to this. Like everybody just does what they think is right.
Yeah.
And sometimes not sometimes, just now, I'm comparing it in my mind. Did you remember that study that the New York Times did on TikTok algorithms?
Yeah.
And how, so like they did a study where they made a bunch of TikTok accounts and they just let them go. And they were like, what happens when TikTok just runs its course? And it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was like, it's not neutral. It like is bad, really, really, really bad. And so like in a really stupid way, the story somewhat goes, okay, so humans decided to do life without God. What happens when we just like leave humans and let them do what they want to do?
Yeah.
And the answer like, well, really, really bad things.
Yeah.
So yeah, the context that with which you're even talking is so baked in what Jesus did. Like globally, yeah.
Yes.
So,
which, yeah. I feel like we're like not even going off notes anymore. We're just like,
we both have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
Because and that's why it's a fun one to talk about, because it's not like you and I both haven't talked about it or even thought about it a lot in our own lives all the time.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah. I think that's like we've arrived at like a really helpful, I think, rule when reading the Bible and like specifically reading the Old Testament is like recognizing and understanding the concepts that we bring in a post-Jesus world that like really are only concepts because of what Jesus has done. So
yep.
Yeah. And
bugs landing on your head.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I felt that. No, that's good. Yeah, and that's like not, it's not a helpful way.
To say it's not fair. It's not fair to the text.
That's a really good point. You're right. It's not fair to the text. Yeah.
It's not listening to what it's trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know how much time we have left. Oh, we have 7 minutes. We haven't gotten to anything.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, help us understand what these people were like, Justin.
Okay. So I'm going to jump to 2 passages really fast. I'm just going to talk about one. You can go look at it because we don't have time. We'll probably talk about it later on in the year. But in 2 Kings 21, we get this passage. There's the printout for you. In 2 Kings 21, verse 12, we read this passage where God is talking about Israel. And he says, like, I'm going to wipe Israel clean. Like, I'm going to come in. I'll forsake the remnant. They'll be looted and plundered by their enemies. So like God is saying, he says, I'll wipe Jerusalem out as one wipes a dish, wiping it and turning it upside down. It's the same word used in the flood of wiping it, which is how I found this passage. You can do word studies and look for linked ideas and words. And so here God is bringing judgment and saying, like, I'm going to wipe Israel clean, which if you know, that's what happened. Like armies came in, took people off into exile, did really bad things. And you can look at it and maybe you go into the flood and you ask the question, like, was God just or was he unfair in doing what he did? And here's a story that lets us know about what they were doing. And if you go on earlier, if you read through 2 Kings 21, one of the things that they were doing was the king himself was sacrificed his own son to a god. So when we're talking about how bad were these people, it starts to paint, like, we won't read the whole thing, but it starts setting up. In verse 3, I have highlighted, he undoes what his father had done right. So here's this king who's now undoing the good of his father. And then he redoes the bad things of Ahab, who's like the worst king at the time. So he's doing all of these horrible things. And one of the things mentioned is sacrificing his own son. So trying to remember, we come to the question of like, was God right in doing this? How bad were these people really? And then you think about a king taking a small child and saying like, I'm literally going to kill this kid to get some kind of favor from the gods, to find out an answer, to get some kind of benefit, to win a war, whatever it would be. There are a lot of reasons they did it. Especially given the context, it probably was like, I want an answer to know if I should go do something. So I'm going to kill my kid to get that answer. Like that's a level of evil that I literally don't believe. Like I think even emotionally don't believe exists. I don't know if you feel that way. Like I like can't put myself in that level of evil to like have a little child and to kill them for something.
Well, that's like especially potent for you, like as a dad. Like that's like I can't even imagine how difficult. Like Yeah. So I'd like to kill your own kid, which we'll get to. That shows up in the story later on with Abraham. What's going on there? Yeah.
So there's that story. And then there's another story. We have 5 minutes. Do we just walk through that story really quick?
Yeah.
So Genesis 18, it's kind of a well-known story for a really different bad reason. But it's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So if you go to Genesis 18, verse 16, you can read through it, but it's fascinating. So God sends these messengers that are angels that look like humans, but God himself is kind of there. It's a really confusing story. Yeah, go back to our podcast about spiritual beings and how confusing it is. But anyway, they get up to leave, and it says they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. So Abraham's walking with these like spiritual beings on their way to the city Sodom. And it says, Yahweh said, don't know, to himself, to the beings, we don't know, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? So he like, God is going to do something, and he's like either talking to a spiritual being or in his own mind kind of going like, should I tell Abraham? I don't know, imagine like walking with someone and being like, should I let him know what's about to happen? I don't know. So then Abraham, he says, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. So the whole setup is basically God saying, should I let Abraham know what I'm going to do? Because Abraham is the one who's going to pass on to his kids what being good and following God is. Like this whole thing is baked in, this is what God says is good and right. Especially when you go back to Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and the passing on of not right, of sin, of evil to people.
Yeah.
Then the Lord said, so he decides he's going to tell Abraham, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down. And here's what's crazy. He doesn't say I'm going to go down and punish them. I'm going to go down and see what they've done, which then takes you back to Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. And you're like, well, the outcry of Abel's blood. So it brings up that idea. But then both of those times, God shows up to see what they did. So yeah, to see if the outcry is as bad as, it even takes you ahead to Egypt. And if not, I will know. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. So he says, like, I'm going to go down. They've cried out to me. I'm going to see what's happened. And Abraham stands there. And Abraham approaches God and says, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? So like, if you had the question with the flood, okay, what about a baby? Like why would God flood and kill a baby? Why wouldn't, like I think when I think of the bizarreness of the Noah story, like, okay, he got all these animals and like wrangled them. Like how did he do that? How does that work? Were they pacified? So like, there's clearly something either figurative or spiritual, like supernatural going on here. Something very strong is happening in order for this to happen. So then my mind goes to, well, then God seems pretty limitless in what he can do. So why wouldn't he just bring all of the innocent children and babies to Noah? Like if he can have an ark filled with food and animals, why not bring all the babies? And like, let's start a whole new generation, which again, besides the practicalness of the ancient world and no formula. And, there's just a lot of things that we take for granted in the 21st century. The mortality rate was terrible, all those things. Anyway.
And even again, that's like the idea that a baby's life is like, even, you know what I mean? Like the
we
world.
Do everything we can to make sure a baby doesn't die. And we live in a society that is actually capable of doing that.
Yes. And like cares deeply about like children and like
mortality rates.
Yes. And like cares deeply about like babies and children in general. Whereas that's like a historically not like youth wasn't really valued the way it is today.
I mean, when we had our kids, we had to watch a video I'm not opposed to this. We had to watch a video in the hospital showing like, don't do this. Here's how you do this.
Yeah.
Because they cared so much about like, we want to do everything we can to make sure your baby survives. Our infant mortality rate is crazy good compared to any other time in history. It's wild. Like it's startling to me every time I read how many kids died just from childbirth. So anyway, it's a lot harder than you'd think to take all the innocent kids onto a ark and save them. But if you still had the question of like, is God going to kill the righteous with the wicked? Like this story sets up, like it's saying, oh, you had that question?
Yeah.
So did Abraham. So Abraham starts to like, we sometimes call it bargaining with God, but as the Bible Project podcast where John points out, there's no bargaining happening. Abraham says, okay, if there's 50 good people, and God goes, okay, I won't do it if there's 50 good people. Well, what if there's 45? Okay, I won't do it if there's 45. Okay, what if there's 40? Okay, won't do it if there's 40. Like we sometimes think about it as them bargaining, but God never, he's not meeting them in the middle. He's not like, 42, like he doesn't bargain.
It's not counter offering.
No, he's just like, oh, that's a great point. Yep, if there's 30, sure, 20, sure, 10, sure. Like every time God's just like, yep, if there's that many righteous people. And so you should get the sense reading this, you're like, oh, God doesn't seem too opposed to the idea of saving the righteous. And you're like, so are there going to be 10 people is what the story kind of sets up. Long story short, it's kind of it isn't a R-rated story. Genesis 19, they go and the people there are not good. Like they're about as evil as you can imagine. Very, very bad. Like literally the kind of stuff that I just won't even talk about, but you can read it. Really horrifying story. So remember, God hears about evil. He goes down to check it out, and it is like horrific evil. And then he has Lot, which is Abraham's cousin or nephew, and he saves Lot and his family. This one family is all they find. Like that kind of answers it narratively. Is like they find this one family that's considered righteous, and I don't even think they actually say he's righteous, do they? Maybe they do. I forget. There's so much text here. Someone can read it and tell me. But what's interesting is whether or not it says they're righteous, it saves that group. Oh, yeah, because I think it's just that he acts righteously. I don't think it ever actually says it.
Yeah, comparatively.
He acts with hospitality towards these angelic spiritual being figures, which again to us would not seem honorable. But anyway, the story then goes to God punishing this place that's clear. Like it answers the question narratively. No, there were not good people there. It was terrible. And then Lot and his daughters go and they repeat what we're going to explain Noah does. And so even the righteous people that are saved, as soon as they're saved, do something horrible. So like narratively, it's trying to point out this question of, is God just in killing everybody because aren't there righteous people there? It narratively answers like what righteous people?
Yeah.
Who are these humans that you think are so good? Because it seems like everybody just keeps doing bad things. So sorry, that was a long rambly way of me walking through the story, but
yeah. No, and I think that's a really good and like powerful example of the Bible answers itself, like some like the narrative and the stories within Scripture.
But not in a super simple way.
Yes.
It's almost like if you're watching like a complex TV show and you have like a deep question about it and you're like, and you start Googling like ending explained, all those things. Then some really smart YouTuber puts together this like, look at all these things connected. And you're like, whoa, I missed all of that. Like,
yes.
And God is smarter than whatever director made that movie.
Yeah.
So the idea that we could understand how the questions the Bible is trying to talk about without doing the same thing is just kind of crazy sometimes. So.
Yeah.
They need like the YouTube videos of like people doing that with movies for the Bible, but they're less exciting.
Don't you think that the Bible Project really does that? Don't you think that's what the Bible Project
No,
is
because they
doing?
don't do it like I almost want
you
it,
want like
parody.
The red circle.
Yeah, exactly.
You won't believe what we discover
in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah.
Sometimes the Bible Project does title their videos like that.
Like clickbaity?
Not like super clickbaity, but I think they have one video that I remember seeing that it was something like, why this doesn't mean what you expect it means. Or like, I don't know, like it was like a word study or something. I don't know.
It's annoying. And that's just even like the attention that we give to certain things is problematic, right? Like we spend more time paying attention to those. And that's what clickbait does, is it draws on like this aggressiveness in our, I don't know, disagreeing minds. And the Bible just kind of takes a lot longer to sit than that.
Yes. Yeah. Not all the answers are in one sitting.
Yep.
Not even close.
And that's why you read it and read it and read it over and over again. Yeah, if you've ever wondered why people encourage you to read the Bible your whole life over and over and over, even if you've read it before, is because this is how, like, I've read the Bible, not all in one sitting, but for 14 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's still tons of times where I'm like, whoa, I didn't see that. I didn't realize that was there.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And you see connections that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're only able to see like as you continue to build your knowledge and your understanding, which takes way more than one time because there's a lot of content in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is God fair? Yes.
Yes. Yes.
But we understand that's easier to say clinically or just than it is like to emotionally feel or understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But.
Yes. Yeah. And the reality is that. Yeah. Yeah. And we'll have other conversations where we ask this on a more like personal level too, because there's the question of like, is God fair in like this thing that he did in the Bible? Then there's also like, I mean, for a lot of people, the way this sits like a much more heavy emotionally is like, it's the things that have happened in their life or the things that have happened in the lives of people they care about. So.
Yeah. Which I'm actually, now I kind of disagree with myself because I realized that what the Bible ends up saying is no, God's not fair, but in the good way.
Yeah.
Like what the story sets up is God acts righteously, but very gracefully. Like if God was fair, I wouldn't be here right now.
Right.
Because I don't deserve to be. So
yeah, and that's what in a couple weeks we'll dive into with following like the Noah narrative, like what happens with Noah and his family post flood. Because yeah, it kind of does answer the question of like, yeah, actually, what maybe would have been fair
would have been for Noah to be wiped out with them.
Yeah.
For humanity to restart in a garden, like Adam and Eve 2.0. Which we get, but thousands of years later, yeah.
Yes.
We're not there in the story. Anyway, this is fun. If you have questions about what we talked about, email them to youth@church.org.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be on the podcast, but nobody is watching it. Have I told you this? I've had like multiple people come up to me and be like, do you need people to be on the podcast? And I'm like, we haven't been having students on the podcast this year. And they're like, oh. Because they clearly haven't watched this.
Which if they watched it, then maybe they'd be like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, does someone want to be interviewed about is God fair? We can bring texts and you can talk about it with us. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
I know a couple of students who would love that. I can think of a couple that would be up for this. So
okay, if you fit that bill, let us know.
If you ask a question that then makes us think maybe you'd be wanting to talk about these conversations, then maybe we'll reach out. Maybe that's the prize for asking a good question.
Yeah, we'd have to film a different time, but
oh, that's true. It's 2 p.m. on Wednesday right now.
Yeah. Anyway,
as always, we will slowly. It's the Midwest Goodbye. We do a Midwest Goodbye on a.
That's so true. That's so true.
Is there a podcast called Midwest Goodbye? Oh, that'd be so great.
We should not name our podcast Midwest Goodbye. That tells us nothing about what the content is.
Ah, there already is a podcast called Midwest.
Womp womp.
Where people run out of things to say in the first 15 minutes and say goodbye for the next 45. That sounds like an amazing podcast. 3 reviews.
That sounds like what we do.
Yeah.
No, we don't run out of things to say.
But we just say goodbye.
Way too long.
Yeah.
Like
the person standing at the door and it's like, just go, just leave. Goodbye.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
yeah.
We'll say goodbye then. We'll see you
tonight.
But you're watching this in the future. So we'll see you on Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.